Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Life Zone podcast. I'm your co-host, Eric Pannell.
And I'm Xavier Lanier.
And on this podcast, we talk about the parallels of life and sports. And today we have a special guest, Coach Jay Mills. Many years at the collegiate level, to Notre Dame, for instance, coaching with Coach Lou Holtz. And we're going to learn a little bit about his journey, his book, and you're going to learn some new things today. So, Coach, honored to have you here. Honored, really, truly honored to have you here. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and I'm excited to visit with you today. I'm doing great and looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Guess we'll start things off with, up to this point, just kind of share the early years of coaching and kind of what led you up to this point to where we are today in your career and your journey.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. Proverbs 16:9 says, "To a man belong the plans of the heart, but the Lord determines the steps." And my scenario has been steps of redirection almost everywhere along the way. So I'm going one direction and then the Lord veers it another. So it began, I was a son of a high school coach, football coach. In fact, my dad coached all sports at one point in time and such. But so my dream was to play college football. I mean, I lived, ate, and breathed college football. And then on the National Letter of Intent Day, I didn't have a scholarship. So that was my first moment of brokenness as a young man. And I remember my mom praying with me that day. I was too depressed to go to school. And the next day I got a call from a university. It led to a scholarship. But I tell people my dream became my nightmare because during that first couple of years at that school, they fired the coaching staff, brought a new staff in. But I learned because I got affiliated with Athletes in Action and Campus Crusade with Christ. I learned that I had made football an idol, and so I think that's one of the things that was taken away from me. So after 2 years, I gave up that scholarship. But the day after I gave up the scholarship, I got a call from a local high school coach looking for an offensive coordinator, and the coaching staff at the university had recommended me. And even then, I tell people it's before Blackaby and King ever wrote Experiencing God. I was seeing markers in my journey. So the day after I don't get the scholarship, I get this call. The day after I give up the scholarship, I get this call. So I thought, this is too much to be a coincidence. I'm going to go and at least listen to the man, hear what he has to say. I decided that I would coach that fall. We won the state championship, Class 2A in Illinois. And I thought, this coaching gig's pretty easy, and so I was a little foolish in my youthful days. I'm still probably foolish now, but I figured there's only one way to go, and that's down. Well, lo and behold, one coach I had in college, he was only there for a spring football practice. He becomes the head football coach at Western Washington University and connects with me after that and offers me a position to finish up my undergraduate degree because I still had coursework to do, but I'd have a full-time position coaching college football. And that led me on a 30-year coaching expedition, I'd say. And each step along the way, just amazing markers, because that person, that head coach, used to be a graduate assistant for the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. And I got called out of the blue by Jerry Faust because I applied to 40 different colleges to try to get a graduate assistant position. And when I got called by Jerry Faust to Notre Dame, I mentioned the connection. That helped me get to Notre Dame. Didn't even have to interview for the position. And, it's just amazing. I could go on and on. Like, we were looking for a place because my wife and I had just had a first child. A place would be closer to her family. And Notre Dame's 30 miles away from her folks. And when we moved to Washington State, we had moved all of our furniture we had, what little furniture we had, to her grandmother's basement 30 miles away. So, I mean, the Lord just connects our paths if we pay attention and follow along and be obedient. It's just amazing the opportunities he'll open up.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Talk about the transition from coaching into becoming a pastor and the motivational speaking side of that. How did that transition manifest itself for you?
Well, reluctantly at first, because I thought I'd coach, the rest of my years. And I spent 30 years, as I mentioned, coaching and had some great experiences. And it was another one of those moments. And here's how the transition occurred. I've been reading Crazy Love by Francis Chan, great book. And I was out in California. This is 2010, recruiting in Long Beach, and I had gotten gas real quick. I was heading off to do a home visit, and as I was leaving, a couple of homeless individuals came up and asked me for money. And that's not unusual, especially in California, even to this day, of course. And I've accommodated some requests by food and even replaced a bicycle tire for one at one point in time. But I was in a hurry, did not want to be late, so I staked them with some money with a convenience store attendant. I said, hey, give them anything they want. Food, and such, and drink, as long as it's not alcohol and tobacco.
Mhm.
And I left feeling like I'd done my good deed for the day. And I had one of those epiphanies in the middle of the night. I woke up and I really sensed the Lord telling me, is that it? Is that what you call sacrifice? Is that all you got to do for me, can give for me? And I immediately knew that while I had used my football coaching position as a platform to share the gospel and speak, and I was a head coach at a faith-based university at the time, I had good intentions but wrong motives. And so I talked about, called my wife, she was back on the East Coast, and about even resigning my position that day. But the athletic director encouraged me, said, hey, don't get ahead of God. But it led me on a 2-year transitional period until I sensed now was the time. And then, like Abraham, I went off on a journey to a destination that would be unknown and determined later. And so I did my press conference to resign and retire on January 3rd, 2013. But it wasn't until I went to a coaches and couples retreat with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, I'd been invited there by a former president of FCA, that I came away and told my wife, I said, okay, I got direction what that next step's going to be. I'm either going to continue to work at a faith-based university in some capacity, work for FCA, or become an executive pastor. And I had no prospects in any of the three, but God always takes us, if we pay attention, from A to B, and he doesn't take us to Z, but when he reveals C and we act on it, then he reveals D. I really believe that's the case. And so a month later, I had interviews to become state director of FCA in New Mexico, to be the director of recruitment at Liberty University, and to become executive director at a pastor. And that's how the transition occurs. So one step at a time, not getting ahead of the Lord, and just praying and seeking and being dependent upon him to reveal it in his time.
Mm-hmm. There's always those conversations. My wife always says, like if I'm restless at night and I can't sleep, or if I'm just up, she's like, what was the Lord talking to you about tonight? Because there's always those moments when he decides to speak to you, and it's always moving you in a direction he wants you to go in. So I totally understand that. Absolutely.
Hey, Xavier, I couldn't agree more. In fact, that I think is when the Lord speaks to me more than any other time, is the middle of the night. And probably it's because we keep ourselves too busy on our agenda a lot of times during the day, that he has our undivided attention in the middle of the night. And
absolutely.
And I've also found that we have to be careful too, because if that's where and when the Lord speaks to you, wherever it might be for anybody out there, that's also where the enemy is going to attack also. So we need that hedge of protection around our minds to make sure that we can separate truth of God, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and sanctify them in the word. Your word is truth, from the evil lies of the enemy.
Yeah, you're speaking about speaking to you in the middle of the night. That's the moments we're away from TV and social media and the phone ring and everything else. That's when our mind is the most quietest and we can hear things the loudest. So I always look at it.
Absolutely. No question about it.
Yeah. Coach, as with any journey, you have a lot of ups, you always have downs and challenges. I'm just curious, with the different coaching styles, right? You have coaches that just focus strictly by the book of being a coach, X's and O's. And then you have what I think your style and approach is that I enjoy, is the discipleship and kind of the faith-based part of it. What challenges did you encounter, if any? I'd be curious to understand what challenge you faced with that approach along your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, I haven't lost a game in the last 9 years since I retired. So, I got all the answers now. I'm like everybody else, from my recliner with my big gulp and my junk food, and calling the shots. I knew they should have went for this, but anyway. But no, I think some of the battle for me was personally, and then I'll say within myself, and then external battles that I had. Internally, it was making a transition from being a transactional coach to being a transformational coach. And so I was raised, and again, my white hair shows it, old school, and so it was very structured, very attention to detail, which is important. But there's a difference between discipline and harassment. Discipline is when you can say, will that person be better academically, athletically, spiritually, relationally? If the answer is yes, that's discipline, But harassment is if you can't say yes to one of those things. You're asking things of people transactionally that really don't amount to a hill of beans. So I think making that, that transition from what I had grown up in and experienced myself and how I was trained as a coach to becoming the coach that Christ wanted me to be. That was, and with confines of also at the same point in time, trying to transition externally from environments where it's very, made very clear to you what you can and cannot say from a faith-based standpoint to, exemplify the Christ-like traits that you want to at the same point in time, because you're not allowed to verbally express some of those things. And then even when I got into a faith-based environment, then I had to kind of be able to release and relax and go, okay, yeah, I can quote the scripture, and things of that nature. And once I did that for 10 years, I didn't want to go back into the confines. But so personally, that was a struggle for me. And I wish I could say that I did a great job in making that transition. I know if I could go back, they say we all want to be successful. We're all going to have failure, but what we don't want to have is regret. Regret is knowing what you could have done, should have done, you didn't do it. I wish I would have made a better transition and a quicker transformation into a transformational coach. The other thing was externally, the forces that were out there. I literally had one head coach that I worked under tell me that if I ever mentioned Jesus Christ again, that I'd be fired. And so in one interview, and I mentioned this in my book, in one interview, I answered more questions about my faith than I did any questions about X's and O's and such, which was totally illegal to be asked those questions. But, as I prayed over it, I just felt like, we're to do everything in the natural and trust God for the supernatural wherever we're at. And so the Lord led me to a place at one point in time I wasn't sure I wanted to be, but while I was there, I'm his representative, and you operate within the confines that you have because of the respect for authority that we are to have. Because when we respect our authority that's over us, we're being trained to respect our heavenly authority too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could literally see the inner conflict within that, right? Because it's no different than corporate America and everywhere else where, we wake up every day and we're led by what we're led by. And that is, in this case, by faith. And when you're commingling in with other people that don't operate the same way, but you work on the same team, it's kind of hard to fully show up as who you are and what you want to believe, right? And so I could definitely see that inner conflict for sure.
Absolutely, and you're right. In the secular world, that's the thing that all Christ followers need to navigate as best they can. And so, whether we're and we look for those opportunities, and those opportunities will present themselves where we can be more expressive of our faith, and because this is a broken world, and so people are most open to hearing some of those things when they experience the brokenness themselves, when there's a health issue, when there's a loss, a death of a loved one, a divorce, things of that nature, a loss of a job, things of that nature. All those hardships, everybody's going to have them. When they present themselves, that's when really we have the opportunity to go from what we've been displaying and investing in relationships that we have with others to being able to share in confidence with them a life-changing message.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's always, and as you speak about the conflicts of trying to balance both worlds, right? It's always, for me, I try to let my faith guide me in those private conversations. And when people come to you for advice, right, because they understand who you are, and they may see the Christ in you, right, to understand that you're going to give them sound advice and be not in their best interest, and not to somewhat judge them or put them down in whatever it is they're going through, right? And so that's always been an important part of my life, to always try to be that light for others. So I definitely understand that sentiment.
I think one of the things that, the Lord has used my experiences with, and because everything that happens to us in life, he's either allowed to come into our life or he's brought into our life. I mean, Job talks about that in the very first chapter, that even the enemy has to come to the Lord and get permission to do anything. And so nothing that happens to us, we always need to remember, everything that happens to us goes by the throne, first and foremost. But so one of the things that, because the experiences I had in coaching, and I appreciate you guys' podcast so much, is I've taken coaching principles, combined them with scriptural support to come up with biblically based coaching principles for personal and professional growth. And I do that in a free newsletter and a free video series that I have, because I think that, we're all called to coach. And coaching is just a metaphor for discipleship. It's a leadership model, and it's a transferable skill set. And so that's what my ministry has been about, is trying to help people become coaches for Christ in whatever field that they're in, athletic or otherwise. And it cuts across every demographic that there is. It's something that we all have in common.
But sticking on that transformational piece where you mentioned, so like my college coach, I was blessed to have coaches that they did not just focus on the X's and O's, but I remember sayings and quotes and things that they would say even back in my younger years. You can see I've got the gray hair on my chin now, so I'm a little bit older. But for you, when it came to players, what were you most intentional about? Of what feeling did you want them to have when they left your program and go off into the real world and kind of go into the next phase of their lives?
We talked about a whole person development approach is what we wanted to have, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And we had a 4-tiered goal setting strategy where the top tier, the purpose of our program, we said, was not winning. Winning would be a byproduct of what we did, but our top tier was excellence. And it comes, that's scripturally based. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 1 says, "Finally then, brethren, we request and exhort you in the Lord Jesus, that as you have received instruction from us as to how you ought to walk and please God, just as you actually do walk, that you excel still more." And so we're called to excel, and things either get better or they get worse. They never stay the same. Mm-hmm. So we must intentionally strategize and implement a program that helps people excel. And so we wanted to do that on the field, off the field. And we knew that by doing that, wins would follow. And we also knew that we were preparing them for life as well. And my goal was not only to, as Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not turn from it. My goal was to train up coaches as well, because coaches multiply as well. And so now some of my players are coaches, some of my coaches are coaching collegiately in the NFL and high schools, and we're multiplying that way. And that's what we're called to do. The Great Commission is therefore go and make disciples for Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. So that's what we tried to really focus on, was establishing a foundation, a holistic approach, and then building upon, framing that so that we can multiply this coaching tree throughout the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. Like, so you speak about the multiplication of coaching and how that goes throughout your, like, you lead the guys into coaching and how that multiplies them. The coaching aspect and the motivational speaking aspect, as well as the preacher aspect, is all similar in its scope, right? Because you, as a coach, you're motivating players to perform, and you're motivating others to do what you need to do to win. So I've awesome perspective on that. What would you think? And I'm probably going to take you back to some of your glory days here as a coach. What was outside of that state championship? Is there one shining moment in your coaching career that you look back on and really like it really brings you to a happy place?
Thankfully, there is a couple of them. There's not enough of them, or I'd probably be still coaching today. But let me tell you one off the field, one on the field, if I can share that with you. The one on the field was the 2005 championship at Charleston Southern. Overcoming obstacles is an understatement. We lost a young man, a leader of our team named Eddie Gadsden in a tragic car accident that summer. We had never had a winning season at the school. And so we lose our top player, our top leader. We go into that season, never having had a winning season. We start the season losing to a Division II school 42-0 at home. And we're an FCS school, Division I. Anyway, and the Lord did an amazing thing. And by the end of the year, we're playing for the conference championship. We have a winning season, and against the number 8 ranked team in the country. We're heavy underdogs. And long story short, we win in double overtime. It was phenomenal. And I'll never forget really just feeling more like I was an observer to what the Lord was doing rather than me having any active role in it. And as that last play occurred, we batted down a pass on 4th down in the second overtime. The number one thought that came to my mind was Mark 10:27. With man, this is impossible, but not with God. With God, all things are possible. And, I'll never forget that. I think anybody who was there, it's even become a book. It's called Believe, EG21, played like there is tomorrow, no tomorrow. So that was, a phenomenal experience. The other one was shortly after I got to Charleston Southern as head coach there. We're in a recruiting weekend, but I took a break on a Saturday night because the Hula Bowl was being played, and 2 of my players from Harvard, who had been seniors that year, were playing. Neil Rose, the quarterback, and Carl Morris, a wide receiver. And halftime of the game, I'm watching, and they did great. Carl threw a touchdown pass on a reverse pass, and these are top players in the country, Ohio State, Alabama guys. And Neil had thrown a touchdown pass, and I wanted to watch the whole game, but I was tired. We had recruits in, as I mentioned. I had to be up early the next morning, so I went to bed, and my cell phone rings. And I pick it up, and I hear, "Coach." I said, "Yes." "This is Neil." I said, "Neil?" And he goes, "Neil Rose." And now I'm just trying to process. I'm going, "Where are you?" Because I thought, was the game pre-recorded, and this is Hawaii. He goes, "I'm at the Hula Bowl." He goes, "It's halftime at the game." He said, "We always talk at halftime, Coach." And that was a moment I'll never forget. Yeah. I mean, he calls me through 5 different time zones or 6, depending on the time of year. And at halftime of that all-star game to touch base and asked me if I had any coaching points. And I gave him coaching points, but can't help it. Once a coach, always a coach. But that was touching. And, that young man went on to, when we played the University of Hawaii twice, when I was at Charleston Southern, he ended up, he became a very successful businessman, still is to this day. He ended up paying for our wives so that they could come out on the trip on that. So, just so those seeds that you plant, they extend further than you realize, and they bring more blessing than you ever can realize too.
Talk about the power of your voice to call you in the middle of the night. You're dead asleep, he wakes you up and you still have the fortitude to provide those coaching tips.
I didn't say it was good coaching tips. I